What's up, guys? It is Lowsh here. Thank you for tuning in to this video. Today I want to go through some of the vocal processing that I did on my song Excuses with Wendzelle. It came out just a few weeks ago on StoryTime. It's kind of like a poppy tech house, techno, house music type tune. But I want to go through my vocal processing just to kind of show what I did. I'm by no means like an expert in vocals, and if you are an expert in vocals and I do something extremely stupid in this video, then please do not hate, appreciate. And if you are new and you have never done vocals, maybe you can find something useful here. And maybe if you are super experienced, maybe there's something here for you as well. Yeah, my disc is almost full. I know that. So the first thing I want to go over, first of all, this is where I have my vocals here. So I've grouped them all up in this group track 4, and everything within here is vocals. The first tip I have is to go through your vocals and to actually cut the vocals to remove unnecessary sounds, to remove like the unnecessary sibilances or any other sound that's just not desirable. Clicks, pops. If you don't want breaths in your recording, for example, here's what this sounds like once it's all cut up and adjusted.
Can you tell me, baby, do you miss our secrets?
Now, granted, this is just the one audio track. If you notice, I have a bunch of them kind of stacked up, and I'll go into more about why I do that. But my first tip is to go through and just remove like this right here. I'm pretty sure this was something with like a big breath in it. Yeah, like see, that was a breath, and you can see it if I amplify it. Like I just took that out completely because or I turned it down so much so that you can't even really notice it in the mix, which again, depending on your type of music, might be a good thing, might not be. The second tip I have is to adjust all the levels. So if you look at, like, let's just say of this particular vocal track right here, this track 6, all of the sound waves are pretty consistent, and you can get super granular by going in and like monitoring them with like a gate tool or something, or you can set a brick wall limiter on it if you want. I'm kind of old-fashioned. I like to go in and actually first manually adjust them so they're similar, and then I go in with a compressor and a maximizer to make them hit that perfect level right in the middle. That's going to be really good because then you have a much flatter vocal track to work with, instead of one that like goes crazy loud and crazy quiet, and it's hard to work with that, right? You want something that's kind of consistent. So the second tip, and I mean, you can see over here, look at all this chopping I've done, right? Some of that might be for effect purposes, but there's just so much chopping, and the best way to make sure that it's smooth with like the changes in volume is to show the fades and go in and adjust the fades, so you can tell it to make it more of a smooth transition or not, depending on if you like that. So that's the second tip I have for you. The third tip I have is to actually go in and put in reverb on the low mids. So if you look at this particular reverb instance here, if I can click on it, come on. Look where I have this reverb, right? So it's like at that 600 hertz range and goes a little bit lower. The reason I do that is because I found that in songs, the low mids are typically not as forward as we may think they are. I was actually studying some of like Drake's music, ironically, for the way that they do their vocals, and I watched a production video from one of their producers who was talking about that. And here, I'll show you what it sounds like if I go 100% wet, just to give you an example of how extreme, or I guess what frequency range this is in.
Can you tell me, baby, do you?
Right, so that's like pretty low mid. I only gave it about 35%, and you can do this to taste. So like you can play
Can
it
you tell me, baby, do you
and play around with where you want that level.
miss our secret?
Of course, you probably want it with the song playing.
Can you tell me, baby, do you miss our secrets? When you think I'm
right, you still want some presence in the mix, but in general, if you can push that low mid back, it'll clear up a lot of stereo space and will sound a little more professional and polished, from my experience. The fourth tip I have is to group up your audio tracks. So I have so many audio stems here, right? So like this one down here, and then these little like embellishments, and this one, which is probably like a filtered effect. And I group them all up because once you get them all stable and kind of at that same level where they sound consistent, then you can add some macro overview effects to it. Things like, I want to make sure that overall this frequency is louder, that this one's a little bit lower, or this range. You can do some notch EQ like I've done here to take out this particular frequency for whatever reason, and then of course some automation, right? So it's usually a really good idea, again from my experience, to group up your tracks that way, especially your vocal tracks, so that you have macro control over it, because you don't want to be changing something in just one audio track and then have that not translate to the others, right? So grouping them up is a really great way to do that. If you don't know how to group in Ableton, you just select multiple tracks like this, right click, and then go to group tracks. Depending on what DAW you're in, I'm sure it's something quite similar. And then the last tip I have, the last tip I have for processing vocals is I actually separate my mono and my stereo audio tracks. So this track right here, I think, is my primary. Let me take a look here. Yeah, so this is like my primary mono vocal stem, mono vocal track. This is like what you hear in the middle of the mix.
Tell me, baby, do you?
Right. What I've done is I've actually duplicated it over here. Sometimes you'll have it right next to each other, but in my case, they're pretty far apart. This track 11 is completely stereo. So I've duplicated the audio, and I've gone in and I've used a chorus effect to kind of give it more of like a dissonance, to separate like the amplitudes, right? So that the vocals are a lot more wide. And then I've actually gone in with a utility here and made it 100 or 200% wide, which means you're only hearing what's on the far right and left of the mix. So here's what this stem or this track sounds like. Right, so that's like purely stereo, but I like doing this because it gives me more control of the stereo mix of the vocals. So when I combine the two together, I can control what's happening in the middle of the mix, right, making these vocals more prominent in the mids. But then I can go to the stereo and I can listen to the whole track in just stereo and take out or add certain frequencies. One thing that most people do is they'll take out all the low end in the stereo mix, and that's usually a pretty good idea for things like vocals. People say you can't have your sub frequencies in stereo, right? Which is, I think, pretty true, but I also know some producers who do keep that in. So it really just depends on how you want to do it. But the way I like to do it is to separate the stereo vocal signal from the mono vocal signal, and then mix the two together to where they're sitting comfortably, right? Because I want vocal presence on the far sides of the mix, but I don't want them to be overpowering, and I also don't want them to be too weak or too feeble. So when you combine them, here you can maybe listen to what it sounds like. Here's just the mono mix.
Tell me, baby, do you?
And then here I'm adding the stereo.
Miss our secrets. When you think of my skin on you, do you lose it, lose it?
There's a little bit of clipping there because my processor is kind of freaking out right now. My computer's doing a lot of shit right now. But yeah, so that's one thing I like to do is separate the two just like that. And then when you go into the master, to the actual track, you can also review, the stereo and the mono mix to see how the vocals sit. So here's the vocals on the whole track in just mono.
Tell me, baby, do you miss our secrets?
See, there's a lot of presence there, which is good for mono. And then you can flip it to full stereo, and here's what it sounds like. So you can still hear that there's vocal presence in the sides. And that's another important fact, is that most songs do have vocal presence on the far lefts and rights. And if you do your vocal processing this way, you just have so much more control of it. So yeah, thank you guys. That's all I have for this video. This is my song Excuses with Wendzelle. It came out just a couple weeks ago on StoryTime. I'll have a link to it down below if you want to check it out. But let me know what you guys think. There's so many different things that I do in production that I just are super basic to me that I don't even think to talk about. So if you saw something and you're like, whoa, that's weird, I don't know why that looks like that, just let me know in a comment or whatever, message me, I don't care, and I'll be happy to talk about it. So see you guys.